Nobody dares to mention this woman's name because everyone who investigates her always dies mysteriously. The film begins by showing a young woman named Ashley having a video call with her female best friend. During their conversation, they begin to talk about the mysterious house located in a small town called Ashland. At first, everything seems completely normal, but in the middle of the conversation, Ashley suddenly hears knocking coming from outside her bedroom door. When she opens the door, there's nobody standing in front of her home. Thinking it is just her younger sibling trying to prank her, Ashley starts walking around the house to look for them. However, without Ashley realizing it, a mysterious figure has been silently watching her from the living room the entire time. After making sure nobody's around the house, Ashley returns to her bedroom feeling confused, but just as she is about to close the door, a knocking sound suddenly happens again, instantly frightening her. The story then shifts to a married couple named Chuck and Maria, who are looking for a new house with the help of a real estate agent named Boone. Boone offers them an old house in Ashland Falls that is surprisingly cheap, even though it is much larger than the previous house they looked at. Chuck immediately becomes suspicious because, according to him, it makes no sense for a house that big to be sold at such a low price. Boone explains that the house has been sitting on the market for almost 3 years, so the owner wants to sell it as quickly as possible. Chuck and Maya begin to feel interested in the property, especially because the house is spacious and looks comfortable. However, the atmosphere suddenly changes when Chuck's younger sister, Espella, arrives and sees the house for the first time. Unlike Chuck and Maya, who look excited, Espella visually seems uncomfortable the moment she enters the house. Chuck explains that the house has plenty of space that would be perfect for Espella's visitor. But Isabella still looked uneasy, almost as if she has had a bad feeling about the girl. After they officially move in, the story begins focusing on Chuck's point of view during their first few days living there. It does not take long before Chuck realizes there are many strange problems inside the house. During a rainstorm, he rediscovers that almost every part of the roof is leaking, feeling furious because he thinks they are deceived. Chuck immediately calls Boning while selling her pictures of the Leafaxuve. After that, he enters Maria's studio where she is designing dresses. We're doing a live stream. Inside the room, Chuck notices an old mannequin named Martha standing in the corner with a creepy appearance. Chuck clearly dislikes the mannequin, but Mary explains that the Martha was something she kept from her very first studio in New York, so she cannot bring herself to throw it away. However, just as Chuck leaves the room and closes the door, the mannequin appears to move slightly on its own without even noticing. Not long afterward, Chuck goes outside to inspect the roof more closely, but instead he runs into his neighborhood named Larry. Larry reveals that the previous owner of the house died by suicide inside the property. Chuck is shocked because Winnie never mentioned anything about that before. Chuck later goes back inside and checks the leak roof previously sent to Boney. But while looking more carefully at one of the pictures, Chuck suddenly feels chills running down his spine because there is a shotgun lying on the floor of the house. He is absolutely certain the gun was not there when he looked at the photo earlier. The next morning, Chuck is shocked after seeing Martha standing outside the house. Not longer later, Larry comes over to see what happened. Chuck tries convincing himself that this is probably just a spar pulling some kind of rank. Laurie then explained that the town of the Ashland Falls has carried a dark history for many years. Many residents have mysteriously died after suffering from severe depression and strange disturbances that nobody can explain. According to the stories spread around the town, all of those incidents are connected to a mysterious entity that targets people who are mentally vulnerable. Laurie keeps referring to the entity simply as a which only makes Chuck even more confused. However, Larry refuses to explain any further and instead suggests that the Chuck search for answers himself at the local library. Later that afternoon, Chuck visits the town library to look for information about Ashland Falls. While searching through old books, Chuck suddenly notices several piles of books stacked neatly on the floor, even though they were not there moments earlier. There, Chuck encounters Ashley's again, the same woman from the beginning of the film. However, Ashley now looks completely terrified and emotionally unstable. With a panicked expression, Ashley warns Chuck to put the books back and leave the town before it is too late. She also tells him never to dig dig deeper into the history of Ashland Falls. Chuck tries offering help, but Ashley refuses. Before leaving the library, Chuck notices a poster for a group called Friends of Gardening. Curious about it, he decides to attend the meeting that same night. However, once he arrives, Chuck quickly realizes the group is not actually a gardening club. Laurie and several other residents are already inside the room. During the meeting, Chuck learns shocking news that Ashley has been found dead after taking her own life. The residents begin explaining that almost everyone in Ashland Falls has lost someone because of the mysterious entity haunting the town. According to them, even people who leave the town can still be followed by it. Growing more confused, Chuck finally asks who exactly they're talking about. One of the men eventually explains that the entity is named Helen Foster, a woman believed to have been the source of terror in Ashland Falls for decades. Helen's name is feared so deeply that many residents refuse to say it out loud because they believe it can attract her attention. They also explained that the only way to stop Helen's terror is by finding an address known as 825 Orris Road, the house where Helen once lived during the 1940s and where she eventually died. The problem is that the address has mysteriously disappeared from every map of the town, if it ever never exists. One new suicide, everyone is hiding again. We haven't had a suicide in years, and now that young girl Ashley, she's the one that's been inflicting pain on this town for a decade, can be stopped if we find Forest Road. While the discussion continues, Larry suddenly notices something moving near the staircase. When he goes to check, a terrifying female figure briefly appears. Everyone immediately panics and the meeting quickly falls apart. The residents rush out of the building in fear while Chuck, still confused by everything, briefly notices a mysterious figure sitting alone silently inside the church. The story then shifts to Espella's point of view. Ever since her mother's death, Espella has never truly recovered mentally. She continues to live with overwhelming guilt and emotional trauma that slowly make her condition even more fragile. After moving into the new house in Ashley's ward, Espella's situation only becomes worse. Almost every night she suffers from terrifying nightmares about her mother, making it difficult for her to tell the difference between dreams and reality. One night, Chuck cries, talking to Espella about her own therapy has been going on. However, during the conversation, Chuck's attention is suddenly drawn towards several sketches and drawings made by Espella. One particular drawing immediately feels strange to Chuck because the sketch looks exactly like their new house. The disturbing part is that Espella claims she made the drawing around 2 are the years aliens, long before they ever moved to Ashland Falls. Another drawing is even more unsettling. It shows a young girl standing alone in a dark hallway while a pale hand resembling a ghost hand stretches out from behind and grabs her shoulder. Their conversation eventually shifts towards memories of their late mother. Chuck and Espera again remembering some of her strange habits while she was still alive. Their mother often used to stack keeps in the kitchen into pyramid-like shape while leaving small notes behind that read, "They won't put themselves away. When did you draw this? It looks like our new house." A few days later, Espella becomes friends with a boy named Luke from her school. When Luke visits the house, the two spend time talking in Espella's room while discussing many things about Ashland's plan. That is when Espella begins learning that the town is infamous for its terrifying history. Luke tells her the story of a man who died by suicide inside the town library by hanging himself while neatly stacked piles of books were found beneath his body. According to the local rumors, those piles of books still mysteriously appeared inside the library even today, and many residents claim they have been seen with them their own eyes. Liu then begins talking about the figure believed to be responsible for all the strange incidents in the town, a woman named Helen Foster. According to the old stories, many years ago, Helen's daughter was constantly bullied at school. Helen repeatedly tried asking for help from the school staff, the bully's parents, and even the town council, but nobody truly cared about her daughter's suffering. Eventually, Helen's daughter could no longer handle the pressure and ended her own life. Her death completely destroyed Helen emotionally. Her grief and anger slowly transformed into terrifying revenge. Helen eventually murdered the bullies along with their parents before finally taking her own life using a shotgun. According to the legends surrounding Ashland Falls, Helen once lived in a house located at 825 is old. However, the address has mysteriously vanished from every map of the town, and even the old town maps have been sealed up years since the 1950s. Helen Foster, her daughter, was bullied at the school. Her daughter committed suicide. She killed the parents of the bully and the bully too. and then she killed herself, put a shotgun in her mouth. Nobody really knows what happened that day. Just an address 825 Ordrest Road. Later that night, Isabella attends an art exhibition with Maria. During the event, the two begin growing much closer. Maria finally admits to Isabella that she suffers from bipolar disorder and must regularly take medication to keep her emotions stable. Maria also says that the Chuck does not really understand mental health struggles, but she personally understands what it feels like to live under constant emotional pressure. Hearing this makes Isabella feel deeply touched because for the first time someone truly seems to understand her feelings. Suddenly, the sound of a girl screaming echoes from somewhere in the distance, causing panic throughout the game. Moments later, an emergency announcement orders all visitors to leave the building immediately. Amber, the chaos, Isabella briefly glances towards one of the paintings and notices the figure of a mysterious woman appearing inside it, even though the figure had not been there before. That night, Isabella tries to sleep as usual. However, in the middle of the night, she suddenly wakes up after noticing that the light inside her closet has turned on by itself. Annoyed, Isabella gets out of the bed and switches the light off. She even removes the label completely and places it on the table beside her bed to make sure the light cannot turn on again. But only a few seconds later, a closet light begins flickering once more, even though the bulb has already been removed. Before Isabella can even understand what is happening, a pale hand suddenly emerges from inside the closet. Fortunately, it turns out to be nothing more than a nightmare. However, when Isabella truly wakes up, she immediately feels terrified after realizing that the light bulb she removed is actually sitting on the bedside people exactly as it appears in the dream. A few days later, Isabella meets Luke again and tells him that her nightmares have been getting worse. Isabella even admits that she has started wanting to search for the mysterious address at the 825 hours rule, but Luke immediately warns her not to do. According to rumors, Ashley and her friends once tried searching for the house as well. Ever since then, Ashley began experiencing strange disturbance before eventually taking her own life. In the middle of the conversation, Isabella suddenly receives a phone call from Chuck. Sounding panicked, Chuck tells Isabella to come home immediately because something has happened to Maria. Isabella quickly rushes home and finds Maria crying in a deeply shaken state. When Isabella asks what happened, Chuck simply tells her to pack her things and says that he will return later. While Isabella is gathering her belongings, Luke arrives at the house to check on her. However, the atmosphere immediately becomes strange when Luke notices a photo of Isabella with her mother. Luke says that when he arrived at the house earlier, the woman from the picture was one who opened the door and let him inside. According to Luke, the woman even introduced her as Isabella's mother. Isabella immediately freezes in fear because her mother has been dead for a long time. However, Luke insisted that the woman truly claimed to be her mother. She said, "She was your mother. My mom said she died in a car crash for a few months ago." The two of them begin panicking when they suddenly hear the sound of glass breaking downstairs. Slowly, Isabella and Luke walk towards the source of the noise, but when they reach the lower floor, there is nobody there. Growing increasingly frightened, Luke nervously says that maybe he simply imagined the sound of war quickly leaving the house. Not long after Luke leaves, Isabella suddenly hears a woman's voice calling her name from the kitchen. The voice sounds incredibly familiar and claims to be her mother. Because Isabella misses her mother so deeply, she slowly begins believing the voice and almost walks towards it. Fortunately, Maria suddenly appears and warns Isabella not to get any close. A few moments later, the mysterious voice speaks again, saying that the plates cannot stack themselves. Isabella immediately looks towards the kitchen and sees shattered plates scattered across the floor, exactly like a strange habit her mother once had of stacking plates into pyramid shape. Moments later, the ghostly figure of a woman suddenly appears direct in front of him, terrifying both Isabella and Maria. They try escaping the house, but the front door suddenly locks itself as if sometimes something inside the house refuses to let them leave. In a panic, Isabella runs back to her bedroom and locks herself inside while Maria screams echo throughout the entire house. The story then shifts to Maria's point of view. A few days after officially moving, entering the house, Maria and Chuck have a serious conversation inside their car about Sila's condition, as she still looks deeply traumatized after their mother's death. Chuck starts feeling that the Spila's therapy is not helping much and is only wasting money. However, Maria immediately disagrees with him. According to the Maria, Spila's trauma runs much deeper than Chuck realizes, because Spela was one driving the car when the accident happened. Maria believes the guilt has slowly been destroying Spela mentally, little by little, which is why what Spela truly needs is support and time to heal. After returning home, Maria noticed Jack busy reading old books about the history of Ashland Fall. From those books they discovered something strange. Back in 1953, almost every street name in town was changed, and even the town boundaries were altered. Through those old records, Chuck also learns that their house once had a completely different address, 15 Rose Lane. Not long afterward, Maya walks into the kitchen and immediately becomes confused after seeing stacks of leads arranged into a pyramid shape on this table. At the top of the stack sat a glass containing a small note that read, "They won't put themselves away." Since this strange habit closely resembles Aspader's late mother's behavior, Maria assumes Aspera is responsible and asks her to tell her to clean up her mess. A few days later, Maya is later live streaming from her studio while working on a custom dress from a client. At first, everything looks completely normal, just like her usual broadcast. However, without Maria noticing, the hand of her old mannequin named Arthur standing behind her slowly begins moving on its own. The moment is clearly captured in the camera, causing viewers in a live stream chat to panic while Maya remains completely unaware. During the live stream, Maya receives a phone call from her younger sister. Most likely, her sister is trying to warn her about Martha because she regularly watches Maria's streams and sees everything happening on camera. However, Maria does not pay attention to the call. When her sister calls again, Maria assumes she only wants to see the progress of the bridesmaid dress she is currently making. Because of that, Maria casually lifts the dress towards the camera. But right behind her, Martha's head slowly turns and faces directly towards Maria. The horrifying moment is clearly recorded during the live stream without Maria realizing it all. Not long afterward, one of Maria's friends sends her a message telling her to get out of the house immediately. At first, Maria still doesn't understand what is happening, but only seconds later, she suddenly realizes that the Martha has completely disappeared. Moments later, a loud crashing sound echoes from the bedroom. Maria slowly walks toward the sound source of annoyance. When she arrives, she is horrified to see Martha now standing inside the room with its back facing her. Few seconds later, the mannequins had slowly moved before trying directly towards Amari, terrifying her completely. After the horrifying incident, Chuck and Mari eventually decide to burn Martha's outside the house because they begin believing that something is serious wrong with the manual. However, even during the burning, Chuck still tries to think logically. He starts questioning Maria's condition and asks whether she has really been taking her medication regularly. Chuck even begins wondering if all the strange incidents might simply be hallucinations caused by Maria's unstable mental state. His world immediately offend and anger Maya. According to her, thousands of people saw Mara moving during the live stream, so it is impossible for everything to be on only her imagination. Chuck eventually apologizes and tries calming her down. He states they can leave the house if things continue getting worse, but he needs time to handle everything first. Not long afterward, Ispiller joins them. Chuck immediately tells Ispiller to start packing her belongings because they may have left the house soon. After Spela heads upstairs, Maria returns to the kitchen, but there she once again discovered another strange pyramid of 8 stack on the table. This time, however, there is a new note that reads, "Hello, Maria." Before Maya can even process what it means, the sound of shattering plates suddenly echoes through the house. Moments later, a mysterious woman's voice begins calling Spela's name and asks her to come downstairs. The voice sounds almost identical to their dead mother voice. Hearing it, Spela immediately walks down, instead to search for the source of the voice, even though Maria repeatedly warns her that it is not really their mother. However, Spela, longing for her mother, causing her to continue following the voice into the kitchen. The moment she arrives, Spela is suddenly confronted by a terrifying apparition peering directly in front of her. Terrified, Spela and Maria immediately run upstairs and lock themselves inside the separated bedrooms. But the atmosphere quickly becomes even more terrifying when Maria's bedroom door slowly opens by itself and even though nobody is there, seconds later, the ghostly figure suddenly appears in front of Maria, causing her to scream hysterically. Not long afterward, Maya runs into Spella's room, crying in fear, and the two of them immediately hold on to each other while trying to calm down. However, during the chows, Spella notices something strange about Maria. Blood is dripping from Maria's nose while her face looks pale and weak, as if she is seriously ill. The story then enters a new chapter titled For Her Soul. By this point, Maria's condition has worsened significantly to the point where she can barely move and spends most of her time lying weakly in a bed. Not long later, the doorbell rang. When Chuck opens the door, he finds Luke standing outside carrying important information about the mysterious address known as 825 Forest Road. Luke explains that Ashley had actually managed to locate the house using an old elliptical great map of Ashley Falls. Since the town council only changed the street names and official town maps, they forget to update the old electrical network began. That is how the true location of the 825 Forest Roads was finally discovered. 1900s, this tiny local town was mostly electrified. There is Farrell leading out that way. That's where Forest Road is. After hearing Luke's explanation, Chuck and his pill immediately decide to go there in hopes of finding an answer about the terror haunting them. However, just as they're preparing to leave, the doorbell rings again. This time, Bonnie arrives alongside the cameraman. Bonnie explained that she wants to record Maria's testimonial about the house for a real estate promotion. Chop rise, explaining that this is not a good time because Maria said strangely. Only moments later, Maya suddenly walks down the looking far healthier than before. She even insisted as she feels completely fine and to the interview. The sudden change initially makes Spella suspicious, but something is terribly wrong. In the end, Spella asks Luke to stay behind and watch over Maya while she and Chuck leave together to search for 825 Forest Road. Luke agrees to stay and help keep an eye on the house while they are gone. After Chuck and Spella leave for the Forest Road in the search of the Helen Forest's Thurs's mysterious hour, Maria stays behind at home with Luke because she still has to do a short interview with the Bonnie and the cameraman who arrive with her. However, from the very beginning, that Monsieur during the interview already feels strange. Maria feels different from the usual. Bonnie casually starts the interview by asking Maria to introduce herself in front of the camera, but Maria only says her first name without explaining any further. When Bonnie asks again for her full name for the recording, Maria refuses to answer and begins acting even stranger. Feeling uncomfortable, Bonnie tries changing the subject and asks how the family found their real estate office, but unexpectedly Maria suddenly begins talking about a young girl. Maria starts telling a story about her daughter who used to come to home from school crying almost every day. Confused, only tries steering the conversation back toward the house and property business, but Maria continues speaking as if she is remembering and something deeply painful. She explained that one day her daughter came home terrified and found blood filling the bathroom sink inside their house. From the way Maria speaks, Luke slowly realizes that the woman sitting in front of him is no longer the Maria he knew before. At the same time, Chuck and Spella finally arrive at an old house hidden deep inside the forest. This is our house. The house looks abandoned and completely lifeless. Carefully, they enter the building while searching for proof that the place truly belonged to the Helen Foster. Chuck has even planned to burn the house down if it is really turns out to be the source of all the terror hounding them. Back to the house, the interview becomes even more horrifying. It is now becoming obvious that the Maya is actually being possessed by Helen Foster. Maria begins describing how Helen repeatedly wrote letters to the Clark family, the family of the bullies who closely tormented her daughter, but nobody cared about the letters. Even after Helen begging many people for help, the bullying towards her daughter only became worse day after day. In the middle of the story, blood suddenly begins flowing from Maya's nose. At the exact same time, inside the old house in the forest, Chuck discovers an old box hidden beneath the floorboards containing several letters. As Chuck reads them, he finally realizes a shocking truth. The burned-in house in the forest was never Helen Foster's house. It actually belongs to the Clark family, the same family whose actions destroyed Helen's daughter's life years ago. Meanwhile, Helen Foster's real house is actually the house Chuck, Maria, and Spella are currently living in. The house at once had the address 15 Rose Lane. Chuck immediately panics after discovering that he finally realizes that they were never truly searching for Helen Foster's house, because without knowing it, they had already been living inside Helen's real zone from the very beginning. Every strange event they experience after moving there, from the mysterious knocking sounds and stacks of age to the terrifying disturbance, haunting spell, and Maria, all came from that house. The house itself became cursed the moment Helen Foster entered her life. Decades earlier. Ever since then, Ellen has seemingly viewed anyone living inside the house as part of the Clarks family, the same people she blamed for allowing her daughter to suffer from relentless bullying. That is why the terror inside the house never truly stops, and anyone who moves into the property slowly becomes target of Helen Foster's anger. After realizing the horrifying truth, Chuck quickly searches for Esperilla so they can leave the place immediately. However, when she finally finds her, Esperilla is standing motionless in front of her doorway with an empty expression on her feet. Meanwhile, back at the house, Luke, growing more terrified by the second, finally gathers the courage to ask. Daughter Maria keeps talking about the really is. With the anger in her voice, Maria immediately answers with his name, Mario. Only seconds later, Charles completely erupts inside the house. Helen Foster finally appears in her true horrifying form. Bonnie and the cameraman instantly panic in terror. Luke quickly runs towards the kitchen to hide, while distant screams from Bonnie and the cameraman echo throughout the house. Luke's fate is never fully revealed, but it strongly suggests that he may become Helen's next victim. At the same time, Esperilla suddenly says she has already seen all of these events before through the sketches she drew years earlier. Helen Foster suddenly appears behind Esperilla and places her hand on the girl's shoulder, exactly like the terrifying drawing Esperilla once created long before they moved to Ashland Falls. Chuck immediately tries pulling Esperilla away and desperately attempts to save her. However, all his efforts are completely useless. Chuck and Esperilla are eventually dragged into the room before the door violently shuts on its own. The films end by showing the house at 15 Rose Lane once again standing silent and empty. The story never fully explained what truly happened or what became of Charles Spellman and Maria, leaving ending surrounded by a mystery. And that is where the story ends.